Welcome to Camp Confidential, Beyond the Bars. I'm Katrina McLarin, and with my co-host Cheryl Womack, author, entrepreneur and philanthropist, we tell it like it is. In Season 1, we take you inside the walls of a women's federal prison camp. From pre-sentencing to navigating daily life behind bars, we offer practical advice, survival strategies and insights that no one tells you before you go in. No sugarcoating, no cliches. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Be sure to do your own research and consult a professional. And welcome to today's episode, Get a Job, which is based off the book, How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Federal Women's Prison Camp by Cheryl Womack, available now on Amazon. This episode talks about the various jobs available in prison. Now, Cheryl, why is it important to get a job?
I think the most important reason you want to get a job is so that you start introducing some structure into your day. Without a job, you really don't have anything to do but sit around there all day. Remember, I've told you the TV rooms are fairly booked and fairly busy. They're always not on. The phones aren't available. The computers aren't available. You're supposed to get up and be dressed by 7 o'clock in the morning for the day. So if you're up and dressed by 7 o'clock in the morning for the day, what are you going to do if you don't have a job?
So how do you go about getting a job? What's the process for that?
To me, the most frustrating thing about getting a job is when I got there, I knew you needed to get a job, mostly to have, some structure to your day and be busy. And I learned they have an orientation class on what kinds of jobs are on site, what kinds of things that you can do, how you go about applying for those jobs. And the different COs come in and talk to the group about those jobs. Until they have an orientation, when you're new in, you cannot apply for a job until you've been through orientation. Now, they just had orientation like within a couple weeks of when I had arrived, and they don't know when they'll do it again. It was probably 60 days, 90 days before they had orientation again for me to be able to get a job. So that's a long time that you're not able to get a job through no fault of your own.
So you couldn't start for those 60 or 90 days?
No, I could not get a job. So, you go to exercise classes and find other structured things to do. But again, it's not uncommon for them, the guards to come in or somebody to come in during the day, a counselor, and yell at you for not getting out of the room or getting out of the dorm. Where are you supposed to go? So it's a little bit crazy. It's like they need to have a system where weekly they have some sort of orientation for anybody new coming in, so that on a timely basis, people get into the system.
And the other important thing is that a lot of inmates coming in don't have the resources financially to be able to fund their books. So getting a job is actually really quite critical for them to have any funds for their commissary, right?
If you're going to make any extra money. Now, for some of them, the amount of money they make per month might be about the amount of money they take away for restitution. So it might be a break-even situation. So it's not always necessarily going to help. But for most people, I think it'll help give you a little bit of spending money to have a job. Again, for most people, the lion's share of the jobs are maintenance jobs, and maintenance jobs are cleaning the bathrooms, emptying out large trash cans. You can always find that job to do. They'll give you that job before orientation because they need those people so badly. You may not officially be on it, but they'll put you to work.
So we know while you were in prison, you had several jobs while you were there, and your main one, I would say, primarily to focus on as being a town driver. How did that come about? Is there a sign or a bulletin board? How does that happen?
No, a gal that taught an exercise class and that I had just gotten to know while in there had done several education classes, and I'd talked to her in the exercise programs and just got to know her a little bit. And she knew the COs and people who would be in charge of hiring for town drivers. And she knew that the gal who was the current town driver, one of the two, was transferring to another camp. And so she knew a spot was coming open. She also knew that I was having some problems with people in education, that they were just not thrilled with me being a good teacher, and making their lives harder. And they had also been being difficult with her for education. And so in a way, she helped find me the job to get me out of education as a big screw you to the education department. Truly.
So your first job was actually what, as a teacher?
Yes, they literally came and found me and said, "We want you to be a teacher." And I was like, "What time do I have to be there?" And they said 8 o'clock in the morning. I went, "Nope, I don't want to be a teacher." And they said, "And then you have to come back, at like noon and do a second one in the afternoon." I went, "Two?" Because usually they have a morning one and an afternoon one, but they didn't have enough teachers. So they wanted me to teach 2 classes.
So what were you teaching? What were the classes?
Well, I taught social studies, and I taught grammar, literature, which was hysterical, but I still taught it nonetheless.
Why was that hysterical?
Well, I'm pretty good at literature, but grammar, not so much.
So we're
So
talking about your ability to spell words. Is that what?
yes, not my strong suit. And it's not like you can go to anything and check your work in there. So you don't have resources.
So for those two jobs, were you obviously you're getting paid to do that? What was sort of the pay for those?
I don't know what it was for teachers because I volunteered. All I heard every time you heard anything from them is how they're on this terrible budget and they just didn't have any money and they couldn't hire anybody and they needed to get somebody in there. And so I said, so you can hire somebody else. I will donate my whatever you pay, and so you can go ahead and hire somebody else. So I don't know what they got now for the town driver job is about $85 a month.
So as the teacher though, I'm assuming that you have textbooks and you have things that you're going over with the inmates with. Did you have issues there with maybe the textbooks or your tools being out of date or not being current with the play of where you were at?
Problem with all of the GED classes, including the test, is it's outdated, very outdated, 15 years outdated material. Now, the Bill of Rights don't really change, but some of the stories might change that might be current. Some ways that the kind of verbiage people use today isn't exactly how they spoke about things before. So it's really not in a current context. But what I found as I started teaching this class almost immediately was, for example, a person maybe didn't understand, they may not understand what the word upkeep meant. It just maybe was a new word to them. Maybe they were Hispanic and they didn't even weren't that familiar with the English language, and this is in English. And so what I learned really in my first day was it's important for me to get index cards and start writing down words, again, not necessarily in the completely proper definition you'd find in a dictionary, but in a form that they could understand and interpret the words to be useful to them. I'm trying to think if there was one word that came up a lot in the GED questions on the test and in the books. And it might be something like thwarted, or I can't think of what the word was, but it wasn't an unusual word, but it wasn't a common word. And what I did was then as we read through things together, as they didn't understand something, they felt free to tell me, I don't understand that. And so we would write it down and we would literally make index for testing and just do oral, holding them up. What are they? Everybody give me a definition. And then the other thing I did is I went to the chalkboard. And for example, if you needed to understand from a historical standpoint for Bill of Rights, where did they start? How am I going to make you remember the Magna Carta? How am I going to remember to make you know what's the difference between the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights? I mean, it's interesting to me, a lot of things historically, because I didn't like history as a kid, a lot of things historically in this class, the light bulbs went off for me to realize, these lords actually were lords and, had power to some extent over in England, where they knew they had just enough power to sort of kind of control their lands. But that's why they made the Magna Carta, so that they could at least limit the king's control, not completely, but limit it. So these lords are the ones coming over to start our colonies saying, whoa, we've been under a king. We know you can have rules that sort of kind of take care of it, or you can create some whole new rights that say, I have these rights and you can't take them from me. So it's the first time it probably occurred to me in life while teaching social studies, that you wondered how these guys were so smart. Well, they'd lived and breathed these experiences prior, and it just doesn't occur to you until you sit. So we're sitting here drawing it and trying to do a little map and diagram for them. And I would put circles up and go, what's this circle for? It'd be the Bill of Rights. What's this Magna Carta? And I just get them to go walk through it till they could tell the story easily, because that was the story they were going to have to remember to tell in the questions when they got them in the G. And it made it interesting.
With the classes you were teaching, the grammar and the social studies, etc., this was also the inmates could achieve their GED. What's the importance of that?
Well, while you're in prison, the BOP requires you to go to class. They don't require you to pass your test, but I think they get bonus points, or they're certainly rated on their effectiveness of getting people first into classes to take them, and second to pass GEDs and to test for GEDs. So there's 3 different levels: into the class, testing, and passing. So there are 3 ways that the BOP measures you. They measure you on who gets enrolled in the GED classes because they require you to go to school and work toward your GED. Your order from the judge might require you to get your GED. The whole time you're in BOP, you're going to go to school for GED, or you could lose good time, get shots, have other problems. So the second way they get measured is if they sign up to test for the GED. And the third is if they've passed for GED. It's a big deal. And they'll have a little graduation ceremony and everything for the groups that have passed.
So it's great for the women if to get further education if they can while they're in prison, to keep their own development going. So if we bounce just a little bit and go back to the town driver.
Before you go back to the town driver, what's sad is, and what I learned many of the camps, I won't say all of them, is they put the textbooks in front of the kids, women, whoever they are, and they have them either read them themselves or they just read them together. They don't really discuss them, they just read them. And then they might answer the questions or have them just answer the questions at the back of the book. So they're really self teaching. So if you don't know a word, you can't ask about a word. If you didn't understand a paragraph, you can't ask about that. You're not even saying it out loud or talking to each other. So these people are falling asleep in the class, not showing up for class. It's just, it can't be more uncommunicative or engaging with the way it's typically done. And I would have a lot of women come to my class and say, gosh, at every other class I've been in, we just had to sit here and read the book. This is great, because we'd talk about it. Or I would bring in the Wall Street Journal that I got every day. And if we were passing a bill or something, I'd bring it in and say, let's talk about this bill and what this bill looks like. How did it get there? How do you make a bill? What kinds of things are in this bill? How would it fall in line with the Bill of Rights? That kind of stuff. So they could see applicable use to the things that they were learning in school. That did not happen in classes. It just didn't happen. But I thought it was fun. And I think they enjoyed very much having a class where they could see the purpose of learning these things.
You mentioned before briefly that you were having difficulty with education. Is that because you were actually teaching the class? Or
Yeah.
what was the issue there?
I had one of the women who had taught social studies before. Well, she taught science. And I mean, my kids would laugh and we would, carry on, and, we would just have a really good time in class, but they were learning and it annoyed her. And so she was constantly turning me into the CO, saying I'm not teaching correctly and that I'm using index cards and I'm not looking up the proper definitions. And she would just be tell on me all the time. And then we'd have these little meetings with the teachers, and you knew she's been talking about you. You just wanted to go, oh, whatever. But, it was a problem. So he would pull me aside and he goes, you ran a big business with Miss Womack. What would you do with a problem like this if you had one of your employees coming up and talking about this? And I said, I'd fire her, because my class is productive when they're learning, and her class in science is just doing okay. They're not like rave reviews. She's just been here longer. So he didn't want to rock the boat. He was also a very mild, calm, quiet man. So and she was too. So not being so quiet, I'm sure I was intimidating to him and her. But the point is, you should be looking for results. I mean, my kids came to class. Their kids did not show up for class. The whole point is to get them in there and get them passed. So if you can't get them to show up for class, and you're not getting them in to get results, you're still failing. And those are the things I was like, I don't know how you don't see this. And he just didn't want to rock the boat. He wanted me to figure out how to get along with everybody. And to get along with everybody and have them be happy would mean that I'd have to teach the way they thought I should teach, which isn't teaching. And by the way, I have a degree to be a teacher, so I know what teaching is.
So you made the decision, right, I'm going to sort of look for another job. So you knew the town driver one was coming up. So what did you do? Did you approach the CO? What happens there?
My quiet CO decided what he would do would take me out of this social studies class and have me just teach the literature one in the afternoon, the one I was worse at, and help in the math class where they were having problems with the problem student over there, to have one more teacher. So there'd be two teachers in that class in the morning. I was so hurt and so mad that I was being pulled out of this class, and my students literally went on strike and wouldn't come to class. And they were so mad that they were losing me as a teacher. And we got this new teacher just walked in one day and said, as of now, this woman is going to be your teacher and we're going to give Miss Womack this other job. So it was very abrupt, very unsettling. No reasons really given, other than I just think he thought that was a good way to make peace. It infuriated me. But I went into the other
So you
class.
didn't know in advance that was going to
No.
happen?
No. And the kids were so furious. Finally, they came in and said, what are we supposed to do? We're going to get a shot. And I said, go back to class. Don't get a shot over this. This is stupid. You just have to go to class. But I mean, they liked being in my class. I liked my class. I had two classes and I liked being in them both. But I mean, I did that. But in the meantime, while this was all happening to me, another girl who had problems with them in the education department knew that I was having this problem, and she was already mad at them. So she's the one who approached me and said, how would you like to be a town driver? And I just said, well, what's that require? And she goes, a driver's license. Do you have a current one? I went, absolutely. Oh, she said, I'm going to put in a word for you. And it took 2 or 3 weeks, but little by little, you have to get interviewed. And I went through a process to become a town driver. But it's from someone recommending me who was mad at the education department, saw I wasn't being treated very well. And I'd gotten mad at the education department.
So they interviewed you for the town driver. Tell me, did they make you get behind the wheel as part of that interview to make sure you could drive?
Well, I know, Katrina, they did not. I had a valid driver's license. I'm 68 years old. What could be the problem?
Oh, those poor inmates. That's all I'm going to say. I have been in the car with Cheryl, and a lot of people do give her a hard time about her driving. And in fact, I don't think her family lets her drive. They may drive her. So ironically, you end up being the town driver. And to take us through a little bit of that process. So are you on call at any time?
You're on call really 24 hours a day to between the two of you to process anyone who needs to be taken off for a scheduled visit to a facility anywhere in the general area in Illinois or in Missouri around the St. Louis area, or you could go 50, 60 miles in a day on a day trip to get visits, because we were not in a big city. We were in Greenville, Illinois. And so we would go to other smaller towns and go to dentists or orthopedics or different kinds of people. And based on whatever the schedule was, you'd get them. And then locally, there was a small hospital, and we would do some emergency visits there, some medical checkups there, pick people up from the hospital for mammograms. So those kinds of things would be done at the local facility with some, well, they weren't at first with routine, but we ended up establishing mammogram Thursdays. And so every other Thursday, then I would get the bread truck, load in like 10, 12 women, and off we'd go to everybody have a mammogram.
So did you have a choice in which vehicle? I'm assuming you go to a motor pool or something. Did you have a choice on which vehicle you could take, or was that allocated?
Well, you go down to the motor pool, and on mammogram Thursdays, you must have a bread truck because it's too many girls that you're taking. And so you'd go tell them you need the bread truck or you need the big truck, and they don't like it when you tell them what you need. They want to tell you what you're getting. And so any other circumstance, if you're going somewhere, you could get the bread truck to take one person to the bus stop in St. Louis, just the two of you, which is batshit crazy. But we had to have the bread truck when we were taking them for their mammograms and taking groups of them.
You're not familiar with this area. This is out of state for you, for where you've been placed. So how do you navigate through, all these different locations you've got to go to? They give you a GPS, a fuel card. What happens? A phone? What happens there?
It was a riot. So you have to wear your work boots and all your greens, and you go down there and they tell you which car you get. So when you're checking into the motor pool to get your car, you gas it up. You make sure it's full of gas, and you want it to be full of gas because when you're leaving the facility, you have no cash, you have no charge card, you have no one you can meet to fill your car up if you're running low on gas. So if you've got to go to the city and come back and maybe do a couple runs, you want to make sure you have a full tank of gas. So you do that. Then you go up and you pick the person up and you find out where you're going. Sometimes you know in advance, but not usually. I think it's a prison thing. You're not supposed to know where you're going till you're going. You would get your information, you'd get the flip phone. The flip phone only calls the front desk of the FCI. So you get the main prison that then transfers you to the camp. And sometimes they're nice about it and sometimes they're not. I've been hung up on a few times when I'm calling in for something. You have to call back for them to flip you over to the camp. They're not bad, but sometimes it's awkward. At first, they didn't even give me a GPS. And so I was just trying to guess where I was going for everywhere, which is not good because I'm geographically not good. My husband said I must have been dropped on my beacon when I was born because I have no sense of direction. So it was really bad, actually. But then they gave me a GPS from the 1990s, and this is 2017. So I'd get in St. Louis, or I'd be, somewhere in Illinois in a bigger city. And when you go around the bridges where they've done new work, it would just spin and you're like, where am I going? And you just sort of work your way through to try to figure out where you're going to go. That looks like the hospital over there. You're trying to figure out ways for one-way streets on how, it was always an interesting thing to figure out how to get around. Then when you got to a hospital or to a bigger institution that required going into a thing for a pay garage or something, you had to find a way to get in without going through something you had to get out of. And then you had to find a way to park where you wouldn't get towed away because you don't have any money to pay for parking. So, I think they just thought you were going to go drop these people off, and drive around? I don't know what you're supposed to do while you're waiting for them in the hospital. I don't know how you'd know when they'd be done. And if you've ever been around a hospital, a huge medical facility like that, they're very busy. And there's not much parking in it. There's constant coming and going. So I always found a place to park, went in with the person, helped her find her place. Because again, remember, these girls often haven't been off site for a number of years, and they're very nervous about going in and seeing someone. They might be sick. They might not be so sick. They might be finding out they're sick. So it's a very intimidating experience for them as well.
And of course, there's not a guard traveling with you. It's just you and the inmate. There's nothing in effect to stop you from keep driving off into the sunset if it wasn't for the fact that perhaps she'd get lost and it wouldn't be worth the ramifications of it.
When someone came out from all their testing and stuff, and the nurse or whoever was in the office would come over to bring me the papers and go, "Are you the guard?" It's like, "No, ma'am, we're in the same greens that she's in." So I says, "Well, I'm going to give you the instructions," because you could sort of tell this person was not getting what they were telling them. And I have had more HIPAAs signed for me for privacy acts to get medical information than probably anybody you could imagine, because the girls would say, "Please come in with me and listen to what they're saying," which you have to get approved to do, so that I could come back and try to help explain that if anybody wanted to listen to me, or at least help them understand more what a person just said to them.
Well, otherwise, as you said, other town drivers didn't necessarily go in with the women. So there's no real support there either for an inmate that might be getting told that they have cancer or that they've got a short amount of time to live, which did happen, I believe, when you were.
Absolutely. Or just you have to have a serious surgery, or they're trying to guess between it's this kind of a problem or that kind of a problem. And let's say one of those problems came up with the doctor at the camp and the other one's not. And you really need to hear the difference of the symptoms they're giving you for you to try to understand yourself what's really happening to you, to discern, to talk to that doctor. I mean, sometimes the doctor would say, "If you follow these instructions, I think this will go away," and give written instructions. That didn't have anything to do with, according to the inmate, what was being treated on the inside of the camp. So I feared those instructions were going to be disregarded. Again, my only suggestion for them was to take a copy card, make a photocopy of the medical records, put it with all of their legal information, and save it in case they needed to refer back to it. If they got worse, had a problem, had anything go on. Because you get outside direction from a doctor outside doesn't mean they have to listen to you inside, once you're inside being treated by the in-house doctors.
So did you ever get lost when you were a town driver? Did you have any incidents like that where you actually felt unsafe with who you were transporting or where you were going and what you were doing?
I don't think unsafe is the word. Now, I mean, I got lost down by the St. Louis Arch just trying to figure out how to get from one side to the other, because it's a huge concrete thing and I didn't know how to get over to get to where I needed to be. And I could see where I needed was on the other side of the St. Louis Arch. And so it was not uncommon for me to be lost and turning around or backing up and figuring out where I needed to go in a short range when I got close. One time I was coming home and it was before I had GPS, and I thought, well, I'll be able to tell it has this kind of a tree sitting outside of our camp. So I'll watch for that kind of a tree coming down the highway. And I'll also watch for this gas station name, because I could see in the distance we had this gas station name. Well, those are up and down the highway. I figured it out. So that evening around 7:30, 4 o'clock count is 4 o'clock count, Miss Gris, the guard, calls and pretty much says, "Womack, where are you?" And I'm like, "I don't know." She's like, "Start describing where you are." And I started trying. She goes, "I think you're here." And she goes, "How much gas do you have?" And I said, "Not, maybe an eighth a tank." And I was pretty far away, pretty far, I think, south of us. And she was just like, "All right, listen to this." And I would try to write down. I pulled over and I was trying to write down how she thought I could get back. And then she says, "All right, good luck, Womack." I just started driving, and I did. I got back, but I got back on fumes. She came running out to greet me. You'd think you're in trouble, but I really was not in trouble. I mean, I didn't have a way to, you don't know where you're going. Then I started getting the GPS.
It does sound a lot like with prison that, there's an expectation that you're working and that you're performing these tasks, but then you don't necessarily get all the adequate tools to do the job properly.
I think for all the jobs, it was that way. I mean, again, I think there was, you had COs that had a lot of jobs they had to do. And part of their job is to train and get us, who would be their assistants, trained to do our jobs. And again, it's not like I got taken one day out with another town driver to go so that I could ride with her and see what you do as a town driver. But you never go to the same place twice. So how's that going to help you? It's not like you say, "Here, I can show you the way to get there." And so I literally had my husband once for a trip. He knew how to get to, it was not very far from where my sister's place was near St. Louis. And he literally gave us instructions. And he says, "You'll come to the stop sign and it's going to have lights glowing around it, and a four-way stop, and you're going to go to there and then turn left." And so I had it all written down from him telling me in an email, and wrote it all down. Gave it to the gal with me, and she goes, "There are the lights going around the stop sign," to follow his directions, because I didn't know where I was going. Scary.
It sounds a little bit crazy to me, and it's certainly very unsettling for you to sort of be in that position, because you've also, you've got the safety of an inmate with you as well, because you're behind the wheel. Let's talk a little bit about the other types of jobs that you can get when you're in prison. Give me an idea of what sort of roles there are and what might be available.
Well, there are a few administrative clerk jobs, and that might be the person that's going to help with paperwork in the medical offices, the person who's going to help in R&D, who's when you're coming in for receiving, for the girls that are coming in with their paperwork, or there was another woman in there who took notes and typed up documents and stuff for the warden and other offices and stuff. And so that's administrative. There was the big sister's job, was an unofficial job, but a job that paid the girl who was doing it. You had a librarian, and her job was to inventory and put things into the library, take older books out that weren't really being checked out, switch them out between the big prison. Like she'd go over to the FCI and cart huge bags full of heavy books over and switch them out so that the men's prison and the women's prison would exchange books, especially if we got new stuff in. There was an environmental job where the girl had come up to me and said, maybe you could get my job. And it was to go around and just make sure that the different safety mechanisms around the prison, exterior and interior in the dorms, worked, that the batteries were fresh, all that kind of thing. There was the laundry job where you literally ran the machines or you checked people in and out for clothing as the situation arose. Because again, remember, while you've got people checking in on a regular basis or checking out, you also have people who, when they're in there, are changing in size. I mean, you have to get pretty full in your clothes. They have to get pretty tight before they'll change you out into other clothes. There's two of the coveted positions were the woman who took care of the chapel, because she had an office and a TV. And so she had, like her own quiet little world to be in all through the day and up till 9 o'clock at night every night with her own TV and whatever she wanted to watch, and didn't have to go to the TV room. And that's a powerful job to just sort of be in your own world. You could go in there and eat, get away from everybody. And the other one had an office in that very same area, and that was the woman who ran the rec. She worked with the director who ran the men's rec and the women's rec and worked under him as a CO. And her job was to oversee all the activities that happened in the rec, including movie nights and any other things that happened besides exercise. So they're pretty big jobs, but they were powerful jobs, and they came with really good perks.
Well, what about the cafeteria if you're running the kitchen?
The head chef is the queen bee on the camp, because she can limit your amount of food. She can give you crappy food. Our head chef was famous for walking out with, when she'd come out at the end of the day, she might come out with 6 or 12 dinners of leftovers, that we might have thought we ran out inside, but she'd have those to sell or to give to her friends. So, those who ate in the cafeteria got completely different meals than what we got online. They would cook fresh food. I'm not going to say fresh, but that fresher food. So that was a very powerful job. And you had a lot of staff that worked under you, and you worked closely with the CO. I think the warehouse manager is a very important job, because you're overseeing the inventory for supplies that are coming in for both the men's prison and the women's prison. So it's a lot of inventory. And again, those are the kind of contacts that you made if you wanted to figure out how to get fresh onions or green peppers or fresh produce to come directly to you and bypass the cafeteria, because those are the people who could get it for you.
Do you think too that, when you're talking about getting a job in prison and routine, that sometimes that it might be difficult because the guard that's actually looking after you is not actually being paid that well per hour anyway, may not come with a specialty skill set to deal with women that may come from all walks of life, could be withdrawing from drugs, illiterate, all sorts of things, ADHD, there's just a plethora of things that you would be having to deal with. Do you think that's part of an issue too in camp?
I think you've got 3 different levels of guards. You've got the guard who's entry level coming in at $15 an hour. I mean, he's just not getting a great salary for what he might have to deal with and what the kinds of things that could come up in the responsibility. You've got the guard who has been in higher security prisons, and it's maybe been in there for a long time and is in their last leg, and they might make decent money, but they're burnt out. They're working their way out, and they don't want to take on any extra burdens or take any risks for anything that could hinder their retirement. So they're like in their last 5 years and they're out of there. And then there's the ones that are just mean, and they like power and they like authority over other people. And it doesn't matter if they're making $15, $25 an hour, they're just mean. And it's going to be their rules and their way. And they're in there because they like power. So those are the kind of people that you have to worry about can be your CO. There are relationships that happen between the COs and the women are just as engaging and involved in it as the men are. I don't think it's a forced situation. So to me, that was always an interesting part, that, you have guards who won't come down because they don't want somebody to accuse them of, you touched me in the wrong place or you said something derogatory to me. But then you'd have the women go check in for their jobs where there was a little bit of privacy to them, and you knew they had things going on.
And look, and we're not saying that there's issues with all guards, because you had, I know you've mentioned, I think it's Miss Gris several times. So you must have had a very good experience with this particular guard. So it's important to acknowledge that there is that other flip side too, that is a positive one.
Well, we had a couple good guards. We had a guy who came often during the day, and he would come down and walk around the campus, not so much inside a little bit, but they'd always tease him and make fun of him and stuff because he was just like, "You're not going to run me off, girls," And he was just a very nice guy and straight up, and he wasn't that old a guy, but he was just a good guy. But Miss Gris, there was just sanity when she was there. Once my husband came to see me and brought our dogs, and he put our dogs down on the grounds, and Hank started to come running for me. And we're very lucky that I could have been written up for that, because you can't have dogs on site. And I didn't understand that or know that. And so she just quietly said, "Don't bring your dogs anymore," and to make it clear that that's the way it was. Again, if they know that you don't know better, and you're not doing something, and you will have other guards who will just find a way to have you be in trouble for something. And again, in a lot of your jobs, like if the girls go in the motor pools and they're working on maintaining all the vehicles that are used by the prison. Whether they don't work on like the wardens and the personal cars and stuff, but they do work on any vehicle that gets used in every type of vehicle, from washing it, changing the tires, lubing, whatever's got to be done on it. And I think they're learning a little bit about it, but a lot of these people are working their way toward retirement and working their way out. So there's just a lot of things that aren't learned or passed on that I think could be done to make for a better environment. I think if you had guards who were incentivized by the prisons, they could teach you how to do construction. They could teach you proper plumbing. They could teach you proper electrical work. And frankly, where I'm telling you about a place that's falling down, they could take different sections at a time and rebuild it and make it where the place always looked good as new, because you have the prisoners there to do the work and the COs with the technical experience to train them. So to me, there's no excuse for a camp not to be in good shape, other than the fact that nobody took the responsibility or wanted to take on the responsibility.
I think it's interesting too that when you're talking about, prisoners, inmates are encouraged to get a job to help fill up their day. I mean, it helps with mental health issues as well, that you have a purpose and a meaning. And women can find these new skill sets that they have, and yet they're not encouraged. You can't discuss business. So you can't discuss how to implement these new skills and especially your teaching education classes, GED, how that may translate to them getting a job in the outside, or how they start up their own business. These are things you cannot discuss. So that in its own right, I think, is quite ironic.
I always thought it was funny when I had to start sitting in the math classes. I have girls who sit there and act like they were stupid about money, but they were in there for drugs. And I just said, "Don't tell me that you haven't had to make change for somebody or know the cost of what something was and how it was going to break down, and you don't know math." I said, "If we had a pack of drugs out here and we were making a deal, you'd just do this blindfolded. So don't act like just because this is coming out of a math book, it's something different." And they'd giggle and laugh, but then they'd become more engaged, because
And they get it. They'd understand.
anything you have to apply numbers to, they become real things, quantities of things, not just numbers. It's like if something says here's a brick of marijuana, and you've got to break it down to sell it. Well, those girls know how to do those measurements and how to weigh for that stuff. They would know how to do that. So to suddenly see that you've got to do these kind of measurements that you're doing in a program, it's like, stop it. You're just, no, you've been doing this more than you want to know. And, let's get with the program. But again, it's people that want to translate things that you had to learn at some point in your life into how real life experiences would apply.
Well, translating something that may be illegal into something in a legal context is, you're educating them the best way you can.
Yeah, but if that's where they're learning and that's how they've applied it previously, then you've got to take what you know and then take it from there. It's like I told the girl who was my bunkie, and she didn't know she was resourceful. And that girl could find anything that you asked for, just about, and find it quick. So we need, this kind of a book, or we need this kind of information, or we need, this to make food. She could always find it. Very, very resourceful girl. And she had absolutely no confidence in herself, not just in prison, but women everywhere need more confidence. They just need more confidence, more pats on the backs, and more opportunities to demonstrate they have skills, and somebody help them understand what that skill is. And that would be a nice thing to learn in prison, that a lot of these things you're doing are these specific skills, and they apply to these kinds of life circumstances. Those kinds of classes don't happen. I think I had that opportunity because I was a business owner, and I started with a small business of 1 or 2 people, and I had to grow into 100 people in different departments and management, and you're sitting there going, oh, I don't know what you do with different divisions. I don't know what I do with 3 separate companies that have to all work together. So you figured those things out, which helps you translate in these kinds of environments.
So let's just briefly touch on the routine of your day in camp. So what time of the day does the day start?
Well, the PA system starts every day between 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning. Pretty much, if you have a 4 o'clock town driver call, 4:30 town driver, that's where it starts. Otherwise, it usually starts about 5:30, where they start waking people up to come for jobs. Which again, in what world do you have somebody get on and tell you, it's time to get up and come to work, which our cafeteria person would do? You're like, oh my God. And they give them a second call. Okay, last call, you've got to come in here and start cooking for breakfast. And you're like, oh my God, get those kids out of bed, make them go work. Because the rest of us are still trying to get up, but you have to be up and you have to be fully dressed on the RDEP side by 5:30 every morning, on the drug rehabilitation side. On our side by 7 a.m. every morning. All work started pretty much by 8 a.m. unless you had cafeteria or other special projects at 8 through lunch. And then you went to lunch. And if you had a job because you were on an early schedule, then you could cut in the line and you could get in the front so you could eat first. So you'd have a little more time to eat before you went back to work, because the rest of them in line did not have jobs, or they might be sick and they couldn't work right now. So after that, then you work through the afternoon and you get to the evening. And after you have an early 3 o'clock meal, then you have your 4 o'clock count. You go into, after they've got a good count, then you go into the cafeteria and you eat. After you eat, you go do mail call Monday through Friday, and then you're off and you can go do exercise, night classes, different things like that. But it is like Groundhog's Day because every day is the same.
Thank you for listening to How to Go to Camp with Katrina McLarin and Cheryl Womack. For more support, check out the Women of Worth website, www.womenofworth.wow.org, where you'll find helpful resources, including Cheryl's books, Mummy Loves You Everywhere and How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Women's Federal Prison. Whether you're preparing for the journey or supporting someone through it, remember, there's guidance, hope and a community ready to help you navigate this path.